Hi there, my name's Mark and I'm leading your session today for this half an hour or so. Sorry I can't be with you in person, had another thing that I was speaking at almost exactly the same time, so I'm sorry I can't be there, but it's a real joy to be able to record something beforehand and send it to you. It also helps overcome some of the things that can happen with technology for me as well. Look, I'm going to share my screen with you, tell you a bit about what I'm talking about with moral injury and where I'm coming from, and hopefully get to a position where you can feel like you have a new hope and a new direction that you can be doing things in life if things have been going tough for you. Today I'm going to be speaking about moral injury, meaning, purpose, justice and forgiveness. Now I've shared a screen with you there with a very powerful image. I've lived and worked in first responder communities for quite some time. This is an image here by Canadian artist and firefighter Daniel Sundale. This is called Sanctuary Trauma. And it spoke really powerfully to me. He writes about this particular image. The firefighter in this image is doing his best to manage the flame of his post-traumatic stress. Often it takes all that he has to do that and maintain the appearance of a healthy and capable emergency worker. It's the controllable and non-traumatic stresses that may be the catalyst that breaks everything for emergency workers and causes us to fall apart. This secondary trauma can be more damaging than a primary trauma and can be a better predictor of long-term disability. So maybe we should start focusing on how we support our public safety personnel instead of being so myopic in our views of what causes the trauma in the first place. And I think I agree with Daniel because what he has said and what he's put in this image really powerfully resonates with what I'm finding in my research. My research is into moral injury. So maybe I'm going to just share with you a little bit about who I am and where I'm from. I joined the police when I was 19. I was in the police for about 7 years and then was in the fire brigade as it was back then. I spent 20 years in pastoral ministry in a church situation as an ordained minister. And I've spent the last 10 years, including some overlap with my pastoral ministry, as an ambulance chaplain. And I've just started doing some ministry, some research on PhD. Well, actually almost getting towards the end of it. So I've got 20 years in first responder organisations, 20 years of pastoral ministry. I've done lots of work on moral philosophy and moral psychology. And here you can see me pictured with my therapy dog, Wallace, who I take with me in my ambulance chaplaincy capacity. And he and I both enjoy a belly rub and a good walk. That's where I'm coming from. So I bring to it, I hope, something of a little bit of a lived experience as well as some technical expertise of what's going on. And those are two really things that are hard to balance, that lived experience and technical expertise. I've been researching this moral injury for the last 2.5 years and been looking at death, trauma, betrayal, outrage, all those different things. And lots of fun to have at a party, but I am loving it. It's exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time. And it's quite different from my role as a pastoral carer and as a chaplain, and some of that balance between lived experience and technical expertise. Now that I've moved in the world of research, objective data is everything. In research, we really do aim to quantify in so many ways qualitative experiences, to plot our experiences on a bell curve, which is a fancy way of saying we try and turn feelings, emotions and thoughts into mathematical equations. This is actually more helpful than I've made it sound. When we do this, we can pick up trends and we can turn what are personal hunches and thoughts into either a sound theory and a remedy that might help people, or we can turn it into a bad idea that we rejected because it was actually wrong. We thought it might be right, but it's not. So doing this stuff of quantifying things, turning into data is super important. However, there's something within the human soul that ruggedly defies complete quantification. Thomas More, in his book Care of the Soul, a classic book, said, "When I write, I go for insights rather than explanations. Technical and research writing are fairly useless when they fail to offer insight." So we need these two different senses of lived experience and technical expertise. We need the idea of technical insights and technical explanations and deep insights. And that's something that moral injury has really put an emphasis on, to seeing a more holistic way of thinking about things. Dr. Bill Nash was one of the authors on the most influential, probably, article on moral injury back in 2009. And he described moral injury like this: it's a part of the human condition. It's something that all people experience. It's not a medical thing. It's not a health care thing. It's not a religious thing. It's not a spiritual thing. It's not a literary thing, an artistic thing, or a poetic thing. But it's all of these things. While Bill Nash is an accomplished psychiatrist, he battles to stop moral injury being totally medicalised. It's a human condition, and it's something that we have a great deal of power over and control over in ourselves. And that's part of what I want to get at today, is how we can make sense of a world that seems so out of control for us. Whether or not you're in an emergency service context, perhaps it's your family or it's your organisation you work for, or just society in general. How can we move forward when we feel that the very core of us has been broken? But I, like Dr. Nash, am greedy. I want both explanation and insight. I want my mind and my soul intact. And moral injury is a model that says you need a really broad canvas to explain and to gain insight. In the social sciences, there's talk of this big technical word, a biopsychosocial spiritual model. Biological elements play a part, so do psychological, so do our social things that are around us, our constructs and our company that we keep, as well as the spiritual element of our life. And we'll talk a bit about that later. But in my tradition, we've been talking about mind, body, soul, and strength for millennia. So it's not necessarily a new idea, but it's going back and visiting the idea of considering what it means to inject spirituality into our distress or our growth. And when we approach moral injury, moral distress, we come to a field that addresses the very centre of our meaning-making apparatus. Humans are meaning-making creatures. We seek not just to live in and explain our world, but to produce insights about it and our place in it. As societies, humans make complex ethical rules about the world. And as individuals, we have deeply held moral beliefs. There's a little bit of difference there. Can you just see what I'm saying? As societies, we make ethical rules, and as individuals, we have deeply held moral beliefs. Now, they interplay with each other, but they are quite different. We each carry in us a set of our own moral expectations. These expectations aren't strictly rationally formed. We don't do it by plotting it on a bell curve, getting a mathematical formula. They're what Jonathan Haidt, a moral psychologist, called intuitively formed. We form them not by argument or by reference to a set number of criteria, but through our heritage, through our genes, through our family, our culture, all these things that have made us us. So they're intuitive, and when we sort of bring them in, they're part of us. They're also intrinsic. They're right at the centre and the core of our being. Our moral framework is the core of who we are. But what if the core of us gets broken? What if our moral expectations shatter through the unjust or unethical or even immoral actions of others or ourselves? What if we're betrayed by those we trust? Our spouses, our leaders, or even ourselves? And in moral injury, the idea of betrayal is really central. It's a big amorphous idea of I feel betrayed. Part of my work is to try and find the specific elements that are causing that betrayal. But what if the way we thought the world should work turns out to be wrong? Well, the answer to that, I think, is we suffer great harm. All of our certainties, all of our anchors in life have given way, and we come adrift in a world of uncertainties, and we don't know where to turn. Today, there's a short window of opportunity for me to discuss three things to help us unpack moral pain and how we might reorient ourselves and find safe harbour should we be cut adrift. So these three things are: I want to discuss meaning and purpose. I want to discuss justice and what that looks like, and how we might, when justice isn't done, find a place of forgiveness. And that may seem harsh to you if you've had terrible things done to you. But I want to discuss and start to at least start to unpack what forgiveness might look like. And as we go, there's a few different images, because betrayal is a central theme that goes on in the art world. Here is a picture of Julius Caesar being stabbed by Brutus and Cassius and the other gang who ganged up against him. Betrayal is one of the deepest and most serious elements that happen to us. And it needs some unpacking. So I want to define some things first about moral injury, because we're all talking about moral injury today, but it's important for each of us just so that we can say actually what we're doing and where we're coming from. I look at moral injury through two founding definitions, if you like, from two different authors. The first is from Jonathan Shea. In his work, Achilles in Vietnam, which was actually produced in 1996, we see that he describes moral injury as a betrayal of what is right by someone in legitimate authority in a high-stakes situation. You can see those three elements there, that element of betrayal. And here I've put the picture of Judas betraying Jesus and betraying him with a kiss, that juxtaposition of a show of affection with a show of betrayal. And it so often comes like that, isn't it? You know, there's one thing an enemy can never do to you, and that's betray you. But here there is what's called an other-focused element of moral injury, when someone else betrays you, when it's someone acting on you. The second definition that has become really important, and you may have heard, is the lasting psychological, biological, spiritual, behavioural and social impact of perpetrating, failing to prevent or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs. Now, there's some things that are really worth looking at in this. You can see that multifaceted, remember that biopsychosocial stuff that I talked about is really inherent here. And particularly the spiritual element is something new from PTSD. You notice here, though, it's more self-focused when we do something, when we perpetrate something, when we fail to do the right thing. It's other-focused. There's other-focused, so I risked my life, and this is the way they treat me. Look, I deserve better. Part of my role as a chaplain is to sit beside people as they unpack what's been going on for them. And I remember powerfully one person saying, I risked my life and this is the way they treat me. This person had been a great operator in an emergency service for many years and been awarded many bravery medals. And yet he found himself in the centre of organisational payback of a system that didn't seem to care when he was injured. And he just could not make sense of it. He thought the organisation would have his back better than this. And he felt this other focused betrayal. Another picture I'm starting to show is this of the Harbour Bridge. I'm sorry if you're not in Sydney. I'm a Sydney guy and I love that city. But when I was in the police, I used to work here. This was my beat. And three events at this Harbour Bridge define a little bit what some of the wrestles are in self-moral injury. From this Harbour Bridge was the first time I witnessed trauma, serious trauma, a suicide event that had occurred around the bridge. And as a young man, just turned 20 when it happened, I was a little bit shocked by what I'd seen, but you know, that happened. But just around the corner in the wharves that sit at the bottom right-hand corner of the bridge there, a number of months later, we were evicting homeless people and essentially destroying the very meagre possessions that these people had. You know, I knew they were illegally there and they were damaging the property, and you know, I could justify the ethics of evicting these people, but morally it felt strange, destroying the only goods of these homeless people. And I had this kind of inner conflict. Those two events challenged me, but the second one I think challenged me more as a person than the trauma. It ate at me, and it actually in some ways helped me confirm my moral code. So far, I've given you some sense of what moral injury might look like and some examples of how that might happen. So let's get to thinking about that idea of meaning and purpose. What is our meaning and purpose? When people ask who you are, we quite often introduce ourselves by our name or our occupation. But I want us to think through exactly who we are. Who are we? At a core, in our moral framework. Emergency workers have a pretty cool identity, but that can be shattered very easily when things don't work out they want. The identity is I'm the person who comes and rescues and fixes things, but that can be shattered when there's more to it than the trauma and those wonderful things. There can be a culture that can be really destructive. You see, because our meaning and our purpose, many people join the job that they join because they want to do good. They want to use their gifts and skills to be able to better the world. And certainly the case in the emergency service world, and perhaps in the occupation that you do, that you're involved with as well. And our moral code is actually really the central part of our meaning and purpose, and that's how we express it. Dr. Bill Nash, who was one of the co-authors of that second definition of moral injury, said our moral expectations are right at the core of who we are as people and who we are as societies. It's what we build our lives on. It's what matters. It's what we value. It's what we love. It's our system of loves. Our moral expectations are our systems of love. But love is a strange thing to be talking about in our culture, because we seem to have made love more about romance and sex than about the way we treat each other. Very few, if any, workplace ethical codes that I have seen have the word love in them anywhere, because the reference takes us somewhere else. But love, I think, gets us to the heart of the difference between ethics and morals. Morals really is about the things that we love and how we love the people who are in and around us. And it's this idea of loving kindness. It's the call for all of our relationships to be in that. But one of the things about us is that we don't actually examine that moral code. We don't explicitly say, well, this is what I believe about the world and myself and my meaning and my purpose, and I don't want to give that up. It sort of sits there because it hasn't been formed on mathematically or on a piece of paper. But perhaps it's worth what we have formed in our heart and our soul and putting it on paper. Because unless we do, we can run into some particular trouble. I think it's bad for two reasons if we don't really live that examined life where we think about our moral code. It's bad, firstly, because when we cross our moral code and others do, and we don't know what that is explicitly, we're not exactly sure what's wrong. We find it hard to put our finger on the thing that has gone wrong in our world and why we feel so distressed. We just go, it's just not right. It clashes with what I think and what I believe. And so it can leave us in a great conundrum of not actually really knowing what is wrong or how to address it. And secondly, the problem is we can trade it away. One of the things that Jonathan Shea was certain about with moral injury is it really does destroy our character. Sorry about the phone ringing. It really can destroy our character. It can lead us into a path where we trade away what we are and we become something that's very different. It happens at that moment when someone in your organisation betrays you and you start trading your personal ethic. This is what Kevin Gilmartin writes. When you trade your personal ethic, that which is most deep to you, for what is called a situational ethic. Well, if they're going to treat me like this, then I'm going to throw away my moral code and act in a completely different way. I'm going to give up who I am and I'm going to act according to the situation, not according to who I am. And it's at that point that we can experience real distress. We can double down on the distress of having been betrayed by then betraying ourselves and getting ourselves in trouble by acts of omission. Why would I bother doing this? Why would I bother doing those checks when they treat me like this? And then it goes from acts of omission to acts of commission. Well, why can't I take a ream of paper from work? Look at the way they treat me. Which we would never be able to justify if we hadn't have put it on other people and what they're doing to us. And so if we don't understand our moral code, then it's really difficult for us to be able to revisit it and stop ourselves from going down a road that we don't want to. We need that point of being able to self-reflect. And it's here I love what Dean Baker from the University of New South Wales, the military ethicist, said. He talks about it in a military context. He says people who join the military need to clearly understand their moral framework and belief system, because humans are better able to cope with morally challenging environments when we understand who we are. And so it's worth taking a moment to think who you are. So let me ask you, who are you? And this is something that I think will be valuable for you to do sometime today or take some time out. It takes more than the 2 minutes that we're going to have today, although you can start thinking about it. To actually write down who you are, not what you do, the things that you value, the things that you aspire to be, even the things that you dislike, what you think the world is like, and perhaps even an overall statement. For me, I'm going to share a little bit very briefly, and it's not me every day, I wish it was, but it's what I aspire to be. I value loyalty and honesty and self-discipline. I like self-reflection and mercy in particular. I aspire to be a person who's gracious, forgiving and strong. I dislike 3 different types of personalities: bullies, sycophants, people who suck up to other people, and show-offs. I think the world is unfair and broken. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to retreat and look after myself or go into a monastery and forget about others. It means that I want to do what the French theologian Henri Blocher wrote and says, evil isn't there to be understood, it's there to be fought. And I want to fight a good fight. And overall, when I look at myself, I want to leave things better than I found them. This is something I keep coming back to when I find myself morally challenged in situations. That's me on my best day, and let me reiterate, I wish that were me every day. I seldom live up to it. But these are our moral expectations. And see, the thing that's important about them is if we know them, we can come back to them. We can true them up. We can get them all straight again. A bicycle wheel gets out of true. It gets a wobble in it when one or two spokes just starts to slightly loosen or tighten. And the art of a good bike mechanic is to be able to bring them up into true. And you want to do that with your moral expectations, to be able to name them and go, oh, this one's getting loose. This one's a bit stray. And even positively going, wow, I was really able to live that out today in the things that I was able to do. An emergency worker is able to see quite clearly at times the great work that they've been able to do in amongst the frustrations. And so it's an element of reconfirming who you are and what you believe, and also re-examining those and finding time for self-forgiveness or even to seek forgiveness from others when you feel you've done the wrong thing. It's important to come back and revisit that. And so that's something that I'd urge you to do, to think about that. And at the end, I'm going to show you a resource called the Power Manual, Police Officer Wellness and Ethics and Resilience. It's just been released this year, and it unpacks a little bit more about that. And you don't have to be a police officer to read the book, but you can get it on Amazon. It's quite good, and it talks through this in more detail. Now, what I want to do in our last bit of time that we've got with us for now is just two elements. The idea of justice and organisational justice, because the organisations that we work for, the culture that we live in, the governments that we elect, they can cause great harm. And there's organisational preventative strategies that I'm developing in my research. And I'm going to talk about some of those, particularly about justice. And then some individual wellbeing strategies about, well, what happens when it does get broken? And how do we engage with forgiveness? So I want to talk about this organisational and societal justice. Here is a artist's impression of when Achilles was betrayed by his commander, Amegnon. And in this image, we see the heart of what really is the core of moral injury, this idea of betrayal. Now, this is something I've been discovering in my research. I mean, I knew it personally. One of my participants, wonderful, amazing person, says this about their institution. When a person speaks out from within an institution against that institution, they know reprisals are coming. Institutions carry in their DNA the inbuilt self-protection, if you like. They seek to try and protect and to push down those who work in them. Justice is prevented by betrayal. And so how do we develop a just culture? How do we develop a culture where betrayal and these elements aren't in them? I think one of the best ways to think about this is what's called a just culture. The academic from Griffith University, Sidney Dekker, is big on creating just cultures. He says that we should be creating something that is safe to speak in particular. If you hire an organisation, we need the ability to be able to speak at all times. One of the things about organisations is we sometimes, with say work health and safety, is we have to promote the idea of being a safety hero, to speak out. If we're having to encourage people to be heroes in order to speak out, it means our culture is completely broken. Our entire culture needs to be one of safety, where we can speak out about safety and also things that are going wrong in a safe environment. But a safe environment is also one that's not just retributive, one that just says, well, let's find out what was the procedure that was broken, by whom, and let's sack them. That is not a just culture. It's one that actually promotes reconciliation and a restitution as well at times when things need to be paid back. It promotes the reconciliation of people. And so leadership is really important to be able to do that. Leaders are the key people who can reconcile people. Unfortunately, we tend to employ managers rather than leaders. You see, a manager makes sure things are done in the right way, and a leader makes sure the right thing is done. It's that difference between ethics and morals there. Can you see it? A manager makes sure things are done in the right way, according to the code of ethics. A leader makes sure the right thing is done. And so we need to be able to have systems where we promote the right kind of people. Do we put in our systems, even who we vote for, ask them, how do you reconcile interpersonal relationships? How do you do that? How will you help us to be able to get through this? But often justice is not done. And so what do we do individually? That's organisations need to think about this. What about us? Forgiveness. They say that to err is human, but to forgive is divine. Forgiveness is really hard, and I won't do justice to it in the only few minutes that we've got left here. Many people have suffered great injustices and abuses, and the talk of forgiveness can sometimes feel like we're going to entrench that as well by forcing me to forgive. This isn't about forcing to forgive. Forgiveness can never be extracted from someone. It can only be given freely. But forgiveness is something that we sometimes forget. We don't understand it properly, perhaps. I know forgiveness costs us. It costs us the right to hold a grudge against someone, to try and exact from them more than they did to us. And so it costs us that. But we rarely weigh the cost of what it's like when we don't forgive, because there's a cost there as well. And resentment, that's been said, is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to get sick. And resentment, while we're resenting our boss or the person who has done us wrong, we're eating ourselves up from the inside and being consumed by it, while the person we resent is off drinking a Pinot Gris somewhere and discussing property prices up the coast, and it's only us getting destroyed. Forgiveness might just be the thing that opens up a new avenue to peace for you. And it's something I know we could do within our organisations and in our societies at large. And our country won't heal until we can rediscover the ability to speak truthfully and to forgive and ask for forgiveness. And one of my participants, as we were talking about what it looks like in forgiving, he said this: holding on to past resentment and anger only hurts you. Going over things, constantly feeling hard done by and wanting revenge and payback, perceived or real, consumes you so much that you miss the important things in life. Try to get over being constantly angry. I know this is hard. Instead, be cautious and wary of that person. They're not giving you any consideration, so why give them any of your time? So the end point that I want to talk about today is we can create just cultures, and where it's in our power that we should. And when we're wronged, the sense of resentment and revenge that so naturally comes to us is a trigger for us to think, to self-reflect, to think, what is my moral code? How do I stop giving away who I am to these people? Forgiving doesn't mean brushing things under the carpet, quite the opposite. It's a recognition that wrongdoing has occurred and that you will forgive it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be best buds again, or that there'll be a reconciliation, or that you'll ever be able to fully trust them. We should never really put someone who's embezzled money back as the treasurer of our organisation, for instance. It doesn't mean that legal justice or financial recompense should not be sought. It's quite often appropriate. What it is a settled state of the heart that you will not carry this burden. You will not extract ongoing price from them. And the recognition that perhaps at times you've needed forgiveness from others as well. And as I said before, and this is something Sidney Decker writes as well, that forgiveness can only be given. It's got to be something that comes from your heart and your soul. It can't ever be extracted. But could you imagine living in a country where forgiveness was central? Where we recognise the betrayals and the injuries that we suffer at each other's hands. And we both seek forgiveness from others and we give it to others. Not freely, but costly. That it's something that we wrestle with and we grow through that wrestle. That we grow mercy, that we grow strength, that we grow dignity. Wouldn't it be great to live in a society like that? I've been challenged most of all in my research about whether or not I'm truly a forgiving person. My hope and prayer for you all is that in the injustices in life, you'll be able to find a peace, that you'll seek forgiveness and be part of the solution and grant forgiveness where it's needed. This is really hard stuff and there's lots that needs to get unpacked. But I'm going to finish here. You can contact me. You can see my email address down the bottom there. But 4 things that may be good resources for you. The book Achilles in Vietnam, is there. The talk that I've mentioned by Dr. Bill Nash is important. The Power Manual that I spoke of, both those books are available on Amazon, and a podcast called Moral Matters. These are things that you might find useful or helpful, and hopefully those resources will be made available to you. But thank you for allowing me to share some of this with you today. I hope things go well for you, and I hope to see you around somewhere. Feel free to reach out and speak to me, and I hope I can actually see you at some stage. Bye.